Welcome back. We are Gentlemen United, and you are in the Man Cave.
Jason Dale describes himself as a restless, enigmatic, and deeply reflective soul who finds distraction through his work as an IT technical specialist, while persevering through the battlefields of life, using his writing as both sword and solace, hoping that he is more than a male body for which he is scorned. After reading this database of quotes and their sources, it really focused a new light for me on the feminist movement, and brought a lot into question. Perhaps you will be shocked too, maybe not, but in the spirit of true equality between the sexes, I believe that it's important that we truly understand what we think and why we think it. How were our views formulated and who formulated them? What's the basis of our belief systems? And how does it impact the choices we make every day? How does it impact our relationships with our friends, families, spouses, children, and colleagues? Some of the prominent feminists and others quoted here include Robin Morgan, Professor Ruth Wisse, Sheila Cronin, Sally Miller Gearhart, Simone de Beauvoir, Catherine Commons, Sheila Jeffries, Luce Irigaray, Margaret Sanger, Professor Mary Daly, Andrea Dworkin, and Gloria Steinem.
You can certainly look up yourself. I'll include the link in the logo. The definition of feminism is as follows according to the Polish Dictionary. Feminism is the belief that and aim that women should have the same rights, power, and opportunities as men. Barbara Johnson, that champion of radical feminism, I guess is the source where they got this definition from. In order to really evaluate these things, it takes a degree of personal courage and an objective mind using critical thinking to explore our commonalities and our differences. I say personal courage because this will challenge the very foundations on which many of us have built our lives. So buckle up. Trigger warning. If discussing quotes from prominent feminists and objective facts is going to offend you, I'll pause for a moment and invite you to stop watching right now and go on to the next YouTube clip. The shocking quotes here will likely be too much for some to handle. Okay, with that out of the way, let's go on. Joining me tonight all the way from Pretoria, South Africa is Jason Dale, and of course you, our viewers. I'm Sean Best. Hey Jason, how you doing?
Hey Sean, how you doing? I'm good, and yourself?
Not bad, not bad. It's you're how many hours behind me now, or ahead of me rather, because you're in South Africa?
Approximately 6 hours, I would say.
6 hours? Not so bad. All right, Jason, tell us a bit about yourself, and also tell us a bit about the garment you're wearing.
Well, Sean, I decided to choose this particular garment. I've got a wide range of clothes because I've traveled around the country, over here in Africa, and I've also been abroad. And I firmly believe in the power of visualization. I love getting my message across emotively and visually where I can, and being quite aware of the large proliferation of social political opinions out there. I decided to go right back to the origin of humanity. And if you study the scientific facts, ultimately everybody came from Africa. Now, this is an African-themed garment, and it's tribe neutral, but it focuses purely on the African. In other words, they've taken a lot of the design elements of various clothing attire used by the various tribes, because we're living in a country with 11 official languages and a very large cultural melting pot. So some very clever designers went and looked at quite a few African tribes, and they combined a lot of the central themes into a single, what you can say, we call them garments, and it focuses on simply the state of being African. And it's quite an interesting cultural, what we have in this country, particularly South Africa, with those who are familiar with our country's history. There's a lot of racial tension, a lot of hatred, and a lot of, we've had to overcome a lot of that ourselves, and we can teach the world an important lesson about overcoming hating another human being because of what you visually see that discerns them from you. So I felt that this would be a very powerful shirt to wear for today's presentation, because feminism seeks to divide, and this is a garment which I feel portrays the exact opposite message.
So Jason, tell us, who is Jason Dale, and what interested you in building a database of quotes from prominent feminists?
Well, Jason Dale is a very complex person to explain, and I hope that the message that I convey speaks ultimately to my heart. I have a lot in my mind. I've covered a lot of discourse. I've studied a lot of subjects. I've been an activist since the age of 7. I was challenging all kinds of groups and people, and I always followed what my heart told me. I'd read and study a subject. I mean, I was studying human genetics at the age of 7. And through all of these subjects, mostly scientific, mostly healing arts, mostly subjects that I believed would allow me to help people, in all the subject matter that I studied, I always looked for the links. I always looked for the commonalities. I always looked for what a technical guy like me would call metadata, the metadata of the soul. In other words, this is the knowledge that helps you gain wisdom. There's a very big difference between filling your head with facts, or these days non-facts, which is what universities are doing, and actually gaining wisdom, because wisdom is what allows you to discern. And discernment is a lost art today. Discernment is what is no longer being taught to younger generations. And part of this, the rationale behind this database, going back to where I studied, where I came from, moving through studying medical fields, studying learning sciences, studying information technology, which is my actual profession. In all of these fields that I've been exposed to, because in my activism work has covered many areas of human activism, I started to see commonalities in the way people think and the way people actually interact with information that they study. You're not just studying meaningless dots or ones and zeros on a screen. You're not just studying books. Books come alive when a human being reads it. And depending on how you interact with the information you're reading, you're either going to repeat history or you're going to enhance it. So it's one of those two. And, being exposed to a lot of the feminist rhetoric, I learned how people argue, why people think the way they do. And I felt that this was a missing, you could say that this was a missing piece of the puzzle. In other words, this is the one area that I felt people were not looking at closely enough. People get caught up in dictionary definitions and they'll say, oh, well, this is what feminism says it is. Discernment teaches you to see through that. It teaches you to see through the propaganda. Because, let's face it, the media is very good at propaganda. When I say the media, I mean the corporate-owned media, the media that you see every day, the media that teaches people to hate other people because of a different skin color or a different whatever. And discernment teaches you to distinguish between a belief system and a person. If a person holds a destructive belief system, and when you challenge that belief system, you're not attacking the person. And I felt that this database was the best way to challenge a belief system without attacking a person. And so when I created this database, I gave it a very academic feel, because I feel that the scientific method, what we refer to as the scientific method, it separates the person from the issue. And it separates the emotionalism from the actual subject matter. And the best way I feel to approach such a contentious topic is to simply examine the facts. So it's not just a matter of such and such a person said it, and I'm just going to assume it's true because I read it on the internet. My approach was to fact check and cross-reference those quotes meticulously, so that our viewers who may one day see this presentation will know that Jason Dale has put his integrity, he's put his heart into what he does. What you see is a database or a list of quotes. Took an enormous amount of effort, psychologically, spiritually, mentally, for me to put together. And I wanted to make sure that whatever happens, the information that I present upholds the highest levels of integrity, because with all the information that I have in my head, it's my heart that speaks the loudest. And a single photograph or a single picture would define me. It's family. Because I've always believed, even before somebody told it to me, I've always believed that the family is the center of society. It is the fabric that holds us all together. And all divisive movements ultimately seek to divide humanity. And what is the most powerful way to destroy society? You destroy the family unit.
And you know what? We're about to get into that, because anybody who's watching this is probably thinking, okay, that sounds fine and, fine and dandy, but buckle up. So, Jason, I have to say that I read through your database of quotes, and to say that I was shocked at what I read would be a gross understatement. In some cases, I had to read them more than once to be sure that I read them correctly. Particularly shocking were the names and the professions of some of these authors of these quotes. Now, who is your intended audience, and what kind of response have you had since you announced the existence of this database? Given that it's fact-checked and referenced, I presume that you've gained a lot of support from gender studies professors and students alike for referencing it as a source for their curriculum. Is that a fair assumption?
Well, I don't know about the gender studies professors. I would imagine I'm not going to be particularly popular with them. To be honest, when I created this database, I didn't know who my target audience was. So I followed the way of the peaceful warrior. I followed the way of the artist, and the way of the artist is to simply produce the work without trying to create it for a specific audience. When I created this database, my audience is the human spirit. In other words, my audience will be people who have eyes to see and ears to hear. I'm not out there trying to persuade people. The truth does not seek to persuade. The truth simply presents itself to the audience, and even if only one person likes it, it doesn't change the fact that it's the truth. So when I created this database, I created it with the emphasis on the truth itself, not trying to present this database in a certain way that it would reach a certain type of person. I know the art of persuasion does that, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. What I'm saying is persuasion becomes more powerful when it's backed by truth, because I really do believe that if people just look at the truth, it will set them free. It will also open their hearts, it will open their minds, and it will allow, especially if it's done, and this is extremely important, if there are female, if there are ladies, girls present, please understand, I speak to this human spirit in every person. I don't speak to a person of a gender. I firmly believe that there's more to us than our bodies, and I think it's time for the human race to come back to that, to cast aside the hatred taught by religion, by politics, by whatever belief system you have. Please, I ask you, put all of that aside right now. I'm talking to the spirit within you. And a lot of my supporters are actually women. Of all of my friends on Facebook, on social networking, the people that have supported my work the most have been women and men together, because these are men and women all around the globe, by the way, who understand what I understand. They see the destructive effects of hatred. They see the divisiveness. They see how people are fighting against one another, and that is the real enemy. So when I created this database, I created it with purely an emphasis on the facts as they are recorded on paper. So even if, I'm a human being and I can make mistakes, and I made absolutely certain that this database, rather than trying to choose a specific type of audience, I designed the database in such a way that no matter what your background, no matter what your profession, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an academic, whether you're just a layperson, or whether you're a massage therapist, or whether you're a martial arts instructor, you can take this database and you can check the references that I've indicated, and you can find the facts for yourself. I think that is far more important than me telling you. In fact, one of the things I always say to people is, expect that there could be mistakes in this database. And I expect you, as a sentient human being, regardless of your gender or your skin color, I expect you to go out and check this information for yourself, critically examine it, and decide for yourself. That's how the database has been designed. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, so I took a sampling of some of the quotes that you shared with me for the purposes of the show. So you did touch on one topic, and I kind of grouped these into different topics. So the first topic that I noticed a lot of these quotes touched on was institution of marriage, not the threat to it, but the perceived threat of the institution of marriage. So let's get on to the first quote. This quote's by Robin Morgan. She was the Ms. Magazine editor, American poet, author, political theorist, and activist, journalist, lecturer, and former child actor in Sisterhood is Powerful. This was in 1970. Now, her quote here is this, quote, "We can't destroy the inequities between men and women until we destroy marriage." Close quotations. Tell us a little bit about that one. Have you given some thought to what that says to you?
Yes, I have, Sean, and my answer is probably going to get many people thinking. My answer runs a lot deeper than what we understand marriage to be. Now, it's important to mention this background, is that marriage traditionally had nothing to do with the government. It had absolutely nothing to do with the government. If you study all of the cultures, there's a brilliant book by Unwin called Sex and Culture. He studied several civilizations across many thousand years of human history. It's quite an extensive book, and they found that there was a correlation between the sexual restraints shown by a civilization and the cultural achievements of that civilization. And that is very conducive to the family structure. And that book, I wouldn't be surprised if it disappears when, books start becoming digitized and the digital era starts progressing further and onward. And printed books will no longer make a cameo appearance on people's shelves. And the book Sex and Culture by Unwin is a profound book because it proves what people, I believe, innately know, that the family unit is powerful. And Originally, marriage was a tribal cultural celebration of what I believe to be the most powerful human relationship that humankind will ever know, and that is the relationship between a man and a woman. And the celebration of that, and there's a lot of biology behind this too, by the way. I mean, our ancient civilizations, we never had the internet, we never had advanced medical technology, we never had grocery stores down the road. Our survival depended on our ability to depend on each other. Men being physically stronger, they could go out, they could hunt, they could find food, they could build, they could protect the family. When women were pregnant, they needed to be protected by their husbands. So this was a symbiotic relationship between men and women. And the difficulty made that relationship so special, because unless men and women worked together under extenuating circumstances, their children wouldn't survive. It was as simple as that. If a woman survived childbirth, she was taking a huge risk. A man needed to protect his family. He was taking, so he had to fight for his family, and his family were dependent on him. And marriage, to me, is, there's no better word, it's a spiritual. And when I say spiritual, I'm not talking religion, so please don't confuse the two. Spiritual simply means there's a part of you that's not attached to your body, and you've got this woman in your life, and she's got this man in her life. To me, marriage is simply a celebration of that union. It's a man and a woman deciding for themselves, no other parties, for themselves, that they are going to commit to each other. And that's not something you can put on a paper. Now, governments came along and they decided to turn this into an industry, you see. And what we understand as marriage being today, ironically, is destructive because the governments want in on the action. They want to take marriage, and documentaries called Divorce Incorporated goes into this into quite a bit of detail. What the government does is it's a small group of people who want to gain leverage over a larger group of people, and they want to turn a personal relationship between a man and a woman, and they want to turn that into an industry. And into that industry, they want to build a fail-safe. They want to call it divorce, or they want to call it this, or they want to call it that. They want to engineer every single step, every single phase in this relationship between a man and a woman, and they want to control that. They want the money, and they don't want marriages to succeed. Now, when feminism jumped on the bandwagon, they don't have this underlying understanding, but they do choose to use it for their own advantage. The whole idea behind it is that in the 60s and the 70s, the women's liberation movement was actually, a lot of people don't know this, it was actually funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation got all of the advertising into the newspapers. The whole agenda behind this was that they wanted, because before women's liberation, the government couldn't tax half the population, you see. So in order to get women back into the workforce, or rather into the workforce, they saw marriage as it existed back then. They saw it as a threat, because the way families worked back then is that the man would go out and work, and this wasn't seen as oppression, by the way. The men would go out, they would work, they'd come home, they'd bring back the bacon, they'd look after their families, and the woman could be stay-at-home moms. Now, what the feminist movement did is they taught women to see the institution of marriage, not just the contract of marriage, but the whole family, the way the families worked, where the men go out, they protect, they bring in the money, they bring in and then the women look after the children, they're nurturers, they're caregivers. This was a symbiotic relationship in which neither the man nor the woman was oppressed. It was just simply the way things worked logically, and it was done for survival. And women bought into it, men bought into it, because they implicitly understood this. Now, governments came in and they said, but we can't tax half the population, so how do we get half the population back into the workforce? And also, more importantly, how do we gain access to the children? Because if the state has direct access to the children, the state can teach children how to think. This is called indoctrination. And this is how a communist government works.
Don't go too far on that one, because we have a quote on that one. I don't want to go too far on that one, but yeah.
And just to wrap up the question, basically, if you understand the history of the family, you understand that the families had nothing to do with governments. And whenever you hear quotes about the family, about the institution of marriage, it's very, very important to make that distinction, that when the feminist institution, as it's demonstrated in the quotes, I'm not saying that each and every feminist feels this way, but when the feminist established feminist institution in the voice of its leaders talks about the institution of marriage and attacking it, always keep what I've said in the back of your mind, that they're breaking up the family so that they can separate men from women. And if you understand that, those quotes will start to take a new dimension.
If you enjoyed the show and want to see more, join our Facebook page called The Man Cave by Gentlemen United. All of our shows, tons of additional content, and invitations to future shows are posted there. You can add to the conversation and suggest future discussion topics. Please like, comment, share, and most of all, subscribe by clicking the Gentlemen United icon. I promise it's free. Thanks again for joining us in The Man Cave.
Enjoyed the show? Like, share, and subscribe. And thanks for joining us in The Man Cave.